Welcome back for another edition. Let's talk about substance use medication, Renee. How are you this morning?
Hey, I'm doing good. Let's talk about substance use medication. This is going to be one that's in your wheelhouse that I know a little bit less about. So it's going to get fun to have a conversation about all these topics and then talking about whether or not they're helpful or not. But before we kick it off and get into the subject of substance use medication, where are we on the farm this week?
Well, it's the heart of fall, and I'm not ready, which is what happens every year. Every year I say I'm going to be ready, but we're still waiting for the final electrical and that stinking auger that's not getting set on the grain leg, going up to the new grain bin. Combine's still off, getting worked on somewhere. It needs to come back from the dealer. Every year I think this is going to get done early in the year. Like we're going to do this in June, July, so it's all done. No, but luckily we've got our stuff we planted late and we do lots of fungicide. So it's not going to be ready yet. So we got time, but it's more just my anxiety managing that.
Well,
So
yeah, you
yeah,
have to like hold off the frost and the snow and whatnot if you're going to start playing
yeah.
with the later
Well,
months. Like,
well, we've combined in the snow before, Renee, and so it just depends on the year and
that
um
sounds fun.
oh, it's a lot
Okay.
of fun, but you know,
That's what
makes
that
it
big
more
drying bin
interesting.
is for, right? The big drying bin is to dry off the snow. That's what
Well,
it's.
and the air conditioner is fixed in the grain truck this year. So last year it was getting a little warm. It was working, but not as well as it should. So on those really hot days, you're taking corn to the ethanol plant. It's like the air isn't working. I threatened to take it in last year, but it's all fixed this year. So it's going to be a cold fall because the air conditioner's working. That's how you take care of those things. You fix them and then you don't have to worry about using them anymore. So I think today we're talking about substance use medications, right? And kind of the
Yeah.
philosophy behind how did we get to this place of treating substance use disorders with medications. I guess part of that conversation starts with how did we get, we've talked about this many times. How
Right.
did we get to a problem when we think about opioids? How did we get to the opioid epidemic we're at today, Renee?
Well, we got here because we overprescribed pain medications to folks and got them addicted on it. And there are some great shows over on Netflix if you haven't seen them about the pain epidemic. And basically we went out and sold it to doctors, them knowing, yeah, it did kill pain, but it also got people addicted. And then, then it just continued because the challenge is we need ways to manage pain in America, and people have real pain. But a lot of that is an addictive quality. And so we created a whole nother level of addiction in that case.
And we've talked about this in other episodes, I know, but the opioid problem is an American epidemic. It's not something you see around the world because physicians around the world don't use opioids. That's
Yeah.
something that we only do here in America because we have this strange relationship with pain. Part of pain is healing. Our bodies are supposed to feel pain,
Hmm.
but our medical system was built on making sure that no one feels pain ever, which is unrealistic and only an American thing. And so I'm not sure quite how that happened, but when we look at that, we're kind of the odd people out when we look around the world at opioid usage.
And a lot of the pain research shows there's a huge emotional component to it of how you deal with pain and how you feel pain and how you manage pain. And so if you're not dealing with the emotional side of the pain and you're sort of stuffing that, which is a high American trait, by the way, of not dealing with emotions and not dealing with your real root of the issues, that it exacerbates itself in pain. And we all know, at least we should know, that research shows overstressed can show up in pain, right? If you're overly stressed at work and not dealing with your stress, it can come out as headaches, it can come out as back pain, it can come out all kinds of ways because your body tells on you when you're not taking care of yourself. And that's why we always talk about self-care, and why that's such a big component of what we talk about is because your body tells on you. If you do not deal with your chronic stress, your body will hurt in some form or fashion. And it could look like a lot of different things. It can be all kinds of stuff. And so we don't do a very good job of that as Americans. And so I am not surprised that we're the ones that decided, hey, let's just erase all of that part and take a medication to wipe it out. And with the problem with the medications of the opioids was you had to have more and more and more to feel the pain. And then if you were to try to stop the side effects and the amount of additional pain that came on when you tried to get yourself back off of those medications was really challenging. So people got really, really sick trying to take back the opioids once we got addicted to them.
So, in true American fashion, pharmaceutical companies developed drugs to treat the
Drug.
drug epidemic, right? To treat the overusage of opioids. And so, that's kind of what we're here to talk about today is kind of how has the addiction field accepted or not accepted the use of drugs to treat drug problems. And, I think that historically, I think of, some tenets of substance use treatment, going back decades back in the day, and still the philosophy of a lot of treatment programs is you can't use substances, period. Hard stop. And that's not really the case when we think about the current FDA approved evidence-based medications that are on the market today that show a lot of effectiveness
Right.
in helping people treat opioid addiction. So, what are you thinking when you hear that, Renee?
Well, I deal with this every single day when we talk to incarcerated individuals that are addicted and also maybe have mental health issues. And sometimes there's a line in between there where they have self-medicated using illegal substances and but yet maybe are leery of the legal prescribed medications because they don't want to be addicted to them. I'm not understanding that some medications are addictive and some are not. And it gets very muddy. I'm trying to help because you don't want to force people, and you can't force people to take medications. But at the same time, when their mental health is at play, and mental health is at play in many, many cases of folks with pain and many, many cases of folks with substance use disorders, it really gets challenging because not only using the medication for the drugs itself and that addiction, but then talking about it spills over into your conversation of, well, I don't want to take any medications for my mental health. I'm just going to do it the old fashioned way. And that doesn't always work. And so this conversation is really difficult and it's muddied the waters for people just that need help. And it's made it hard for them to know what to do. And depending on the doctor they go to your point, some doctors are like, you don't need medication, just toughen it out. You can do this with diet and exercise or whatever. And there's other docs are like, here, let me give you the next prescription. And so it confuses your clientele.
Yeah, and so I think that's also been difficult because some prescribers are hesitant to prescribe these medications. And when we think about traditional treatment, some treatment providers aren't sure how to address this issue. And I think that's become a challenge, right? And we know that, some of the underpinnings of AA and NA, I know we had talked about, maybe doing an episode down the road about A and NA, right? How important self-help can be. And there's been, I've heard stories of people coming to me and telling me that some groups say you can't use substances at all to be part of some of those recovering communities. Well, that's very difficult when we think about buprenorphine, naltrexone, they're very effective at reducing cravings, of supporting someone's ongoing sobriety. And so, we think about not just medications for substance use disorders, but medications for mental health conditions, those can be a very pinnacle part of someone's treatment. And so looking more holistically can be challenging because this is one of those areas that we still struggle to talk about, even within the medical community to a great extent.
Right. And some of those medications that you're talking about, and I don't know if I don't know enough about these specific ones, but I know there are some that are supposed to help you like not drink anymore, but it makes you really sick if you drink any alcohol.
Right.
And those are a hard sell for folks that are trying to recover from alcoholism and, that are trying to, maybe just do less of drinking or whatever. And there's some good side effects sometimes to some of these. And so when we as professionals are trying to say, why won't they just take these medications to help? You got to look at the side effect list and be like, okay, they have to decide, is the addiction worse than what this medication will do? And sometimes that's a really hard line to find as well. And so it's a really, really tough conversation. But because the pharmaceutical companies have been promoting all of these medications for so long now we have a prescription drug problem. And so let's talk about the data with some of that prescription drug problem because it's now the prescriptions are being used and misused. And I know in our prison system, if people like will keep their medications, trade their medications, sell their medications, it's like a whole commodity of sales and
Yeah.
problems, right?
we just can't get ahead of it, can we? We've developed drugs to treat the problem, but we keep prescribing the opioids. That continues to perpetuate the problem that we need more drugs and more providers to then undo the damage that's done because we keep people getting addicted. And so we're in this never-ending loop that just goes on and on and on. And the data is still showing us that we're still prescribing too much, right? We'll have some
Yeah.
links to data in the show notes, but 45.8% of Americans use prescription drugs within the last 30 days, right? And that could be legal drugs or not illegal drugs. So when we think about how big of an issue this is, it's nearly half of us, right? We're all prescribed things at certain times, whether for an illness, whether it's ongoing. Some of those substances are very addictive. And so we don't always get the education we need, and we're not always safeguarding those medications for others who can abuse them to the extent that we need to be.
Right. And if we look at the numbers, it talks about 16 million people are abusing prescriptions in a year. And
Hmm.
abuse of a prescription could be anything from just not taking it as indicated or, using it with somebody else or other things. We've talked about this in previous episodes, but my parental generation on my husband's side and ours all just had a collection of medications, and then there'd be confusion over how to take them or not take them, or with really bad side effects of taking too much pain medication on top of their anesthesia or on top of their pain medication they got in the hospital, or just different things, because there's just such a plethora of medications. And of that 16 million that have misused it, like 2 million are considered addicted to whatever it is. And so people can get so many prescriptions filled in so many ways. And I know in one family's house, when we went to clean out the home afterwards, there was like 5 or 6 different doctors' names on the different bottles.
Hmm.
And so, it's doctor shopping, if you will, or finding doctors online to prescribe. There's just a lot of ways that this gets really out of hand. And so even if it's the medication they're supposed to have, getting too much of it and having, their their stockpile of it in case they don't get a renewal, especially in these addictive ones, are problematic.
To put that number in perspective, it's 1 of 10 legally prescribed individuals are addicted, right? So that's a pretty high level of folks who are prescribed drugs for something legitimate become addicted to a substance. That's 10%, right? It's actually 12%, but we just put that in terms of 1 of every 10 people a physician sees is going to be addicted to the substance they're prescribing.
Right. I know, and I've talked about this before. There is a comedian that has a show on Netflix, and I'm toying about putting it in the show notes or not. I might. But what's fascinating about it, the person was addicted to drugs, but they had like 5 different types of drugs, and basically found the worst doctor in the community to
Mhm.
prescribe them all the drugs that they didn't even need it for. And the doctor's like, "What do you need it for?" And they're like, they make something up, and they're like, "Oh yeah, well then you
Mhm.
need it." And so it's not as hard as people think to get access to this. And then it's amazing the number of doctors that'll just hand you a prescription. I think about in the military way back when, in the Wayback Machine with Brent, we used to have these big old 800 milligram Motrin pills. And
Mhm.
these 800 milligram Motrin pills were the cure all for everything. It did not matter what you went to the doctor for. You'd come back with these horse pills of Motrin. And granted, not even close to the opioids that came after that, but still problematic. And you were given those for, it didn't matter. It did not matter what you could possibly go to the hospital on the base for. You'd come back with another bottle, and it'd be a massive bottle. The same would happen if you went in for dental procedures. You'd come out with those opioids,
Mhm.
for pain, not just for a few days to get you through the pain, but enough to get you addicted. And I know I have a friend whose husband has passed away, and it was from addiction. And he had started with a dental appointment that got him on opioids, and then he got addicted to the opioids, got prescriptions for a while till he couldn't, and then flipped to heroin. And then he ended up dying in his addiction. And that's exactly his story. And it started at the dental office. And so the addiction happens quickly to some people who just are thinking they're going for a routine medical appointment, and doctors are overprescribing and they're getting hooked. And it is a large number of people. The number of people that are overdosing in our country is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where the education comes in so much, as we think about what needs to happen next. How do you help folks to understand this? I can tell you that, we've talked before. I do a lot of mental health first aid trainings, and that's a great way to start the conversation to help family members have the words to start talking about, how do we talk about this with a loved one? How do we talk about this with a neighbor if we suspect they're using substances? Because a lot of times folks who are really close to it aren't able to connect the dots, right? Sometimes you can't see the forest because of the trees. And I'll tell you, I was recently doing a mental health first aid course, and we were talking about opioids. We were talking about how you get addicted to opioids. And one of the people in my class came up to me and said, my mom has back issues. She used to be a nurse, and I know she's going to three different doctors. And
Mhm.
I know she's hoarding medications. She actually ended up leaving that class early that day to go and get her mom checked back in to a long-term care facility because her mom was abusing medications at
Mhm.
home and was abusing opioids to manage what started as legitimate pain, but then turned into an addiction. And so this just isn't young people, right? This is people all across the age spectrum who are trying to manage, who have been prescribed legal opioids. And a lot of times it's right in front of us and we don't see it. And so I think as we
Right.
think about education, how we think about workplace education, as we think about people being having injuries in the workplace,
Mhm.
they go to the doctor, they go to the clinic, they get prescribed something, and then they come back to work. We've talked before about how do we identify impairment in the workplace. Well,
Right.
there is legal impairment in the workplace sometimes when we look at folks who are managing pain, could be started out as a back issue in the warehouse that
Yeah.
could end up being taking opioids every day to manage the pain,
Right.
which can actually be impairment, right? Because
Yeah.
someone's on such a high dosage. And so there's so much to think about and so much to talk about with this subject that a lot of times we just ignore.
Yep. And the Netflix specials that I'm talking about that are related to the opioids, you can go look them up. But one of them talks about, and the reason we talk about this in rural is that farmers are very susceptible to this. And when they first started coming out with all these pain meds in the 70s, 80s, 90s, farmers were folks that would get injured and hurt, as you do,
Mhm,
because you're doing heavy lifting, you're doing hard labor jobs, construction folks, same way. And so the
mhm,
suicide rates they kind of indicate that there's issues in these spaces. And we don't always get the suicide related back to the addiction. They don't always connect those dots, but a lot of times there's real challenges with folks that are in the manual, that do the manual labor, that do the hard work, like the farmers, like our truck drivers, like our construction workers, all the folks that are out every day doing hard work. And if you do, that's your daily, that's your livelihood. And so if you tweak your back or whatever,
mhm,
you do need help to continue, but it became very quickly that people were getting addicted. I mean, there's some people that I know in some of my communities that an older woman that has issues with knees, and I'm not doubting that she has problems, but I can guarantee that she's doctor shopping and guaranteeing and in that person's case, there's not necessarily other family to watch the person. There's not necessarily other families that are kind of guardianship or power of attorney over those things. And you can just tell by their behaviors and their mannerisms and their wild outbursts and stuff that they're just on. It's just the drugs. It's just the drugs, and they're thinking they're taking it for their pain, and it's more than that. So it's good that you're teaching it in mental health first aid, and people can recognize, oh my gosh, this is what's going on with my family, because that's such a big deal. I've had the same issue with family members in my own family
mhm,
where they are taking the medication that they think they need, but it's too much and it's just problematic. And so what I find fascinating is we think about alcohol being the most abused substance, which is interesting, but some of the data, and we'll link it in our show notes today, prescriptions are the fifth most abused. That's amazing because it's more
mhm,
than tobacco. And we think about tobacco and nicotine. We just had a conversation about
mhm,
that. And that is not even nearly as problematic as prescriptions. And prescriptions are so widely available. And so if you watch any of the shows about this, people younger people can get into their grandparents' medicine cabinets and take medications, or it's somebody else's prescribed medications that somebody else's is taking and getting addicted because there's just so many pills in the house. So it's really important. We've talked about this and just when we did the champagne episodes right before this about having to destroy medications. So important that if you've got extra crap laying around, figure out how to safely get it out of your home because you never know if guests come in that might take things that you don't even think about or younger kids or grandkids, you've got to get these out because by just that simple decision to return stuff to places to make sure they're destroyed can help people. And we think that, and that's going to have to be a house by house conversation because we've stacked up so many meds in our homes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very wise. And it means we have to take a personal inventory, right? We have to think about how we view prescriptions, and we have to figure out how do we let go? Because sometimes you hang on to that. Well, I might need that later. I've heard a lot of people say, "Well, I can't get rid of that prescription. What if I need that later?" Right? Well, it's best to go back to the doctor. It's best to have
Or I paid for
conversations.
it. You don't want to waste the
Right,
money. You paid for
right,
it. So I don't
right,
want to waste the money.
right.
And they can't possibly go bad. Yeah, I've
Right,
heard it all.
right.
Yeah.
Except for like pink eye medication or something, right? Because I can't tell you how often I've used, an expired bottle of pink eye medication I found in the closet. So bad example, I know. So Renee, what is the recovering politician tip of the day?
Well, that's fun that you ask. I'm talking about reading. And reading can be stress reducing or can be added stress, depending on what you're reading. And I'm not making a judgment call. I'm just telling you that I have learned, I have been using a tracker. I wear an Aura ring and I've been tracking now for months and months and months. And I have figured out that if I read a paper book that's like fiction and my brain is relaxed thinking about things not work related, I get much more stress relief than if I'm scrolling on my phone. And my phone, although still nonsense, something's different between reading fiction and scrolling on a screen. I don't know what the difference is. I know there's research out there about that, and I don't want to admit this to myself because I kind of like scrolling, but I have proven to myself now that scrolling really isn't the way to go for me. So I need to do more reading of actual books, putting down the screens, giving my eyes a rest I'm on computer screens most of the day. So I guess it makes sense just to let your brain kind of decompress from all that. But wow, to see it live and to see it actually work is pretty fascinating because I didn't believe it. I was one of those non-believers. So I'm going to read more fiction. That's what I'm going to do. What about you, Jason? Any thoughts in that realm?
Yeah, I can tell that doom scrolling is bad. And so sometimes I find myself when I'm harvesting and everything's auto steering, what else is there to do? But I pull out my phone and of course, I tell my brother-in-law I'm paying attention and doing all the things I'm supposed to do. But I find myself doom scrolling, right? Or you're sitting, you're waiting, you're in the auger wagon, you're running back and forth, and you have time where you're just sitting at the end of the field in the tractor cab. And so, I'm especially at risk for doom scrolling this time of the year because there's lots of downtime where I'm just sitting and waiting or moving equipment and I'm sitting and waiting. And so, sometimes it's easy to, pull out the
Mhm.
phone and watch the videos on Facebook or TikTok or whatever the thing is.
Yep.
And so, certainly that doesn't help. It certainly doesn't give me energy and a positive outlook on life. So, I think it is important to think about how do we fill those times of our life, or sometimes how do we just sit with ourselves and think like we used to do without always filling it with the screen. And I think that's part of the challenge is there's screens everywhere. I mean, even
Mhm.
in my truck, it says Google. Google has to tell me things, because I'm constantly interacting with a screen and it's in front of me, pretty much in every vehicle or wherever I'm at, there's a screen that I could flip to Netflix on or whatever. So I think it's a real challenge. And how do we separate ourselves for our own emotional well-being is a really important thing to assess and think about.
Agreed. So today we talked a lot about medications and the misuse of medications. And it's not wrong to get help for your addictions, and it's not necessarily wrong to need medication to help with the addiction, but you've got to keep that in check. And it has become very muddy, very muddled, people wanting pain relief, but end up with too many pain medications. But we are in a generation of folks really, really overusing and overprescribing prescriptions. And so you've got to be very thoughtful when you're working with a doctor to make sure that you've thought through for you, your personal self, what's in your best interest. Because there are now medications out there to help you with your addictions, but you need to decide, you're going to be addicted to a new medication or are you going to try to just be off of all medications or what? And it's a very challenging subject. And this is one that will spill over into the workplace. And so making sure that you are aware of what's out there, making sure that you are keeping up with the statistics. We put a lot of information there for you in your show notes. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you next time.